I want to give a big shout out as I begin this video to Eric Van den Eyck. I've started looking into biblical criticism. I'm familiar with it, but I did come across a particular tweet and we got into a discussion, and the discussion was, what does regel mean? We all know, well, before we get into what we all know it means, let's see what it means. And as I have right here, I have the Bible for Community Hebrew Root Dictionary, starring somebody you might be well familiar with, myself, available on Amazon as well as from the publisher at kodeshpress.com. I highly recommend kodeshpress.com. Visit and see all the svarim that are available. So what does regel mean? We're going to go through it before we get to our question of the day. Regel means to spy, traverse, be on foot. So it means foot, to be in accord with something, pilgrimage festival, occasion, occurrence, a follower. It also means leg. In Hebrew, there's not two words. Regel is both foot and leg. It means a follower, regular, habitual activity, can mean this slander and gossip, snitch on somebody, and it could also be opposite or at the foot of something, and that's going to be important. We're going to get back to that a little bit later when we talk about Ruth 3. But Professor Van den Eyck pointed out to me that regel can mean penis. Now, I just read from my dictionary. I didn't see that word there, and obviously if I'm missing something, I don't want to miss anything putting together a dictionary, and I'm not one to dismiss an idea if I haven't been through it. It certainly sounded odd. I've never heard it in my years of Torah study. I don't even want to get into how many years that is. It's not such a... Be that as it may, it sounded a little odd, and I decided to look to see, is that something possibly tradition says? Is there a source for it? Let's reserve judgment. So I want to first get into something and why it would have caused me to take a step back, because obviously my first reaction was, these are just academics being pervy. And I want to be fair. So let's go through. Let's see how Tanakh treats, Tanakh being the Hebrew Bible, treats sexuality in general, and specifically how we refer to sexual organs. And we're going to see if regel fits the bill as he laid out. So we have 4 terms that appear in Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, for the sexual act. We have shochev, which is lie. We're going to see that a couple of times coming up. Yada, to know. That's Adam yada et ishto. Adam knew his wife. Ba, and that actually comes up in Bereshit, in Genesis 29:21. I'm just going to read that very quickly. So Yaakov goes back to his father-in-law rather, and he says, please give me a wife, give me my wife, and I'm going to come to her. I've worked all this time. And Rashi, and for those not familiar with Rashi, Rashi is the premier go-to commentary, not just on Tanakh for Jews, but also for a number of the rabbinic works, the Talmud being one of them. Rashi's commentary is very, very important. Master of all areas of Jewish thought and Jewish law. He says that Yaakov was doing something inappropriate, potentially. He resolves it, but ultimately says that word is already crude and that he shouldn't have used it. And we're going to talk about we'll just mention the 4th word. Shagal appears in Deuteronomy 28:30, which is the closest term that we would probably have for sexual intercourse. When we read that in public, in the public readings, we change that word to shochev. that word is already considered to be too crude, and it appears very, very rarely throughout Tanakh. Ba, yada, shochev, those words appear much more frequently. The impression we get, of course, is that there's a certain modesty in Tanakh, in the language, and we don't generally see overtly sexual content. Now we're going to talk about instances where we see references to genitals. Ones that we know, ones that we're going to agree on, and possibly slightly disagree even in that. First one we're going to talk about is basar. Basar is meat or flesh. That term is used in two passages. It's used in Leviticus 15:2, talking about ritual impurity that issues from the body, that a zav, someone who has particular discharge, it comes from his basar, and on the spot, Rashi, all the classical commentaries, this is the Jewish understanding, is this is coming out of the penis. And the same term is used in Ezekiel 23:20. He talks about women going after their lusts, and he talks about going after men with the basar of a donkey. I don't need to describe anything more. But again, basar is a pretty undescript word that we have to be informed what it actually means in context, but there's really no argument. That's what it's talking about. Second term is mivushav. Mivushav, we see it in Deuteronomy 25:11. Deuteronomy 25:11, two men are fighting. A woman reaches up and grabs a man's mivushav. The word mivushav, which is kind of a general word for genitals, it comes from the language of busha, embarrassment. So a woman who does this, her hand is cut off. Well, we won't get into the implications of what that means. In rabbinic terms, that doesn't mean what the literal saying would be. Nonetheless, we see there, it's a very general, nondescript term, modest. The third one we're going to discuss, and I want to get Ezekiel here. Ezekiel talks about, he gives a description of a woman's body, and the term that he uses to describe this particular part of the woman's body, this is Ezekiel 16:36. The term he uses, and he says, Ko amar Hashem Elokim ya'an hishafech minhush-tech v'gale arvatech v'tiznatech, and going forward from there, it's describing a woman's body, and the term mehush-tech it's a language of like the burn side of a pot. Again, there are terms that we use even in the scientific terms in English that are a little more graphic than simply talking about a blackened area. Modest language. And then another term which I think is rather important to discuss, where we see a reference to genitals, and this is one of the sources that were quoted in one of the articles that the good professor shared with me. So I'm going to look at Genesis 24:2. And in Genesis 24:2, it says, Vayamar Avram el Avdo Zakim Beto. So Hashem says to Eliezer, who's the elder of his house, is a slave, Hamoshe B'Kol Hashelo, the person who runs everything, Simna Yedecha Tachet Yerechi. He says, put your hand under my thigh. Does that sound strange to anybody? certainly sounds strange to me, and I'm going to say it's strange just for that we understand how we understand it. The article said that it was talking about the testicles. It's not how we understand it. This is, if we look in Rashi, what does Rashi say? Tachat yerchi, lefi shenishba'a tzarich sheyitor miyado hafetz shen mitzvah kamo sefer Torah or tefillin. What is it saying? When somebody takes an oath, it's supposed to hold on to an object of a mitzvah, either a sefer Torah, that's a Torah scroll, tefillin, those are the boxes worn by men in the morning. They have certain pieces of scripture written in them. Maybe familiar, the common custom of putting your hand on a Bible and swearing. None of these things existed at that point. There was only one object in the entire world that was connected with a mitzvah. That mitzvah was the circumcision. And so Avram asks his slave, Abraham, put your hand on the place where I'm circumcised. That's the only mitzvah we have. Swear on this object. So, as I pointed out, it's something that sounds a little strange, but when we actually understand what's going on, we can deal with it. Just saying that refers to testicles, as the article asserted, just makes no sense whatsoever. So even though I understand this is coming from a commentary, I hope that everybody watching can understand that this is what makes the most sense to say is going on there. Otherwise, actions are nonsensical. Unless forced to say otherwise, people don't generally engage in nonsensical actions. So we want to say that this action that Eliezer is asked to perform makes sense. So now we can get into what the term regel means. I went through already the dictionary definition. Now we're going to get into the three main sources that Professor Weideneichel points out as having to mean penis. So we're going to take a look at Isaiah 6:2. What does it say in Isaiah 6:2? This is a vision that Isaiah is having, Yeshayahu, seeing the angels in the sky, seeing the Kisei HaKavod, God's holy throne. And he describes it as such in the pasuk, in the verse. Serafim amdeim me'alo, shesh kanfayim la'ahad, that each one of these angels has 6 wings. Uv'shtayim yichaseh fanal, uv'shtayim yichaseh ravlau, uv'shtayim ya'afef. 2 sets of the wings cover the angel's face. 2 cover its legs. Red line, we're going to stick with legs for right now. Uv'shtayim ya'afef, and 2 are flapping. So what's the purpose of the legs? What's the purpose of the wings covering the legs? Rashi says, and we're familiar now with Rashi by now, Litzniot, this does it to cover up the body. Shalo yireh kol gufo lifnei baro, that the angel should not be exposed before God, looking at another commentary, the Mahari Kra. Well, Mahari Kra was a contemporary of Rashi and actually influenced Rashi. We're talking about the 11th, late 11th, early 12th century is when these things are being written. And he says, and when he says that the wings cover up the legs, is that Shalo yireh aro, so that he shouldn't appear naked. Obviously, angels don't have clothes, so the wings take the purpose. I can kind of see where he's saying it. But now we're going to take a look at the Metzuot David. Metzuot David, he's an 18th century commentary. he's focused on the literal meaning of the verses, the Mutsurat of it being Yechiel Hillel Altshuler. That's his name, if anybody who's curious. 18th century Rav, who commented on Nach. That would be Tanakh without the 5 books of Moses. He commented on all of these books, and we rely on him heavily for our literal understanding of what it's saying in the prophets. Yichasera Aragla. Litznut. He also says Litznut. Kol Gufo Lifnei Bara. That his entire body shouldn't be exposed in front of his creator. Razal, that would be the rabbis, the ancient rabbis of the Talmud, say, Egel. Ki kaf raglehem kaf regel egel. So this is a little strange. So he refers you to something and he says that they didn't want to remind God of the sin of the golden calf because their foot, regel, is shaped like a calf. Where did he get that idea from? So now we have to go to another sefer. We have to go to another book. We have to go to Yehezkel. People don't realize is that several of the prophecies, the nevuot, that come up throughout the section of the prophets are actually the same prophecy. But because they're given to different prophets, they look different. They sound different. So when we know that a prophecy is, I don't want to say a shared prophecy, but 2 prophets received the same prophecy, we can learn back and forth one from the other, and we can kind of get an idea. So Yehezkel, Ezekiel, has a prophecy of the chariot, and his is much more flowery and descriptive, and we get a lot more information about what this looked like. And if we look in Yehezkel Aleph, Ezekiel, 1st chapter, Pasuk Zion, verse 7, Raglehem regel yeshara, v'kaf raglehem kaf regel eigel, v'notzitzim ka'ein hoshet klal. So we get a description of this leg and the palm of the leg, or the palm of the foot, that these angels, in fact, only had one leg. It was straight, and the palm, the sole of the foot, as we would call it in English, was shaped like a calf's foot. So what is this creature trying to cover up? It doesn't sound like it's trying to cover up a penis. It sounds like it's trying to cover up one leg. One leg that wouldn't even necessarily have room for any genitals between it. Not to mention the fact that it's just kind of absurd, the idea that a angel would have genitals. That should have been patently obvious. They don't procreate. They don't have the desires that human beings have. Why would we think that they have genitals? And I'm going to go even further. Now, this isn't a scriptural proof, but culturally, people should understand something. People in Tanakh are the Jews. And Jews, as my Rebbe in Yeshiva Or Sameach, Avram Rockmill, said, Jews always went long. Jewish dress was always long. If you look at the Hasidim in Borough Park, Williamsburg, Mea Shearim, as well as Timonim, Yemenite Jews who still dress traditionally. If you look at their clothing, their coats called bekishes, or in the case of the Yemenite Jewry, jalabiyas, they're long. They cover the legs. Modesty in traditional Jewish dress is not just covering to the waist, it's covering the legs. In fact, Jews from Germany were derogatorily called yekes, the short-jacketed people. Jews always went long. So from this place, we can't come to the conclusion that regel means genitalia. We're going to take a look now. we're going to jump to Shmuel Bet, Parak Yud Aleph, 2 Samuel, chapter 11. This was the chapter, and I'm just going to be straight out honest, when I was reading his article and reading the tweets, I said, this doesn't sound right. But before we jump to any conclusions and say that somebody's wrong, let's look at the sources. This is a famous story. David HaMelech, King David, he commits what could possibly be construed as adultery. He sleeps with Bathsheba, who at the time is married to Uriah. Whatever the circumstances, whether he did commit adultery is not for our discussion right here. What the discussion is what he tells Uriah to do when he comes back from war. And what David HaMelech tells him to do, and we're going to look at Pasuk Het, that would be verse 8. ויאמר דוד לאוריה, רד לביתך ורחץ רגליך, ויצא אוריה מבית המלך ותצא אחריו משאת המלך. David HaMelech tells him to do something which seems pretty benign on its face. He tells him, go home, wash your feet. On its face, tells him, go and get comfortable. But, as even our commentators say, go take a look. We're going to look at Metzudat David. Metzudat David is crucial for us understanding what's going on in Tanakh. And he says, Orhatz Raglecha, Hu Kinu Letashmish Amita. Says this is an expression of Tashmish Amita. We had already discussed 4 different terms throughout Tanakh that mean to lie with somebody. This is a rabbinic expression for the same act. And the whole idea is that Uriah will go home, be with his wife, and then it'll look like she conceived from Uriah instead of from David. Very problematic. Maybe he's right. Maybe that's exactly what it means. But again, what gave me a problem is that what the academic understanding of this passage is that it's being very descriptive. It's saying that Uriah should go home and immerse himself in his wife's bodily fluids. So somebody could see where I might take issue with that. Let's look at other places where this same expression is used. So we go to Genesis, Bereshit, Yud Het Pasuk Daled, that would be chapter 18, verse 4. Avraham invites the angels into his house. This is just after he's had his Brit Milah, after he's been circumcised, and he's waiting for guests, and these angels show up, and he invites them in, and he tells them to wash their feet. Same expression. Well, if we extract that meaning and bring it over here, that means that Avram is inviting the angels to come in, or the travelers, whoever these people are, to sleep with his wife. Does that sound right? Is that what's going on? Well, maybe, but that would be a little odd. Then we're going to talk about something where I think it really pounds home, and why I think the mistake came through, is that while they looked in one source to see, oh, so this is a euphemism for sleeping with one's wife, and check the other context. Can't say they didn't, but let's take a look. Shir Hashirim, that would be Song of Songs, Parak Hey, that's chapter 5, verse 3, Parak Gimel. Pashati et tunati, echachal b'shana, rahatzti et raglai, echachai tanfim. So, Shir Hashirim, the Song of Songs, is about a man-woman relationship, the man pursuing, the woman running, and it's a parable for the relationship between God and Israel. But on a simple level, this is chapters talking about a woman, autobiographically. She's gone to bed, and she's waiting for her lover to come in to the bedroom. She hears him knock, and she says, I took off my dress. How am I getting up to answer the door? I washed my feet. How can I soil them? Now, I'm hoping everybody can agree that this is a woman in this verse, and women do not have penises. And therefore, when she says that she washed her feet, it's not what she's referring to. It's referring to preparations for bed. Now, let's go back to Mitzvah David. We had talked about Mitzvah David before, and this is the same Mitzvah David, the same person who made the comments originally, and he makes the comment over here that washing one's feet is preparation for bed. So when somebody's preparing for bed, euphemistically, this means to preparing to do other things in bed besides sleeping. It doesn't mean to immerse oneself in somebody's body fluids. I hope that we can put to bed euphemistically the idea that that's what David was telling Uriah to do. There's more. Possibly even more egregious. And again, I'm going to go back to the idea of strange behavior. When we see something that sounds like strange behavior, or even looks like strange behavior, we still, unless we're forced to, try to understand that what's going on isn't as strange as it looks. It's certainly not stranger than it looks. Now let's look at another story. This is going to be the book of Ruth. Ruth is the story of the ancestor of David HaMelech. She's a convert. She's a Moabite convert. And this is her proverbial romance with King David's paternal ancestor, Boaz. Very quick romance, as Boaz doesn't live much longer past their encounter. But the idea is that Ruth, as having been married to one of Naomi's sons, and having died childless, is in a sense bound to this family. There's an idea of something called yivum. We don't really have it, or we don't have it at all in American law, where if a brother dies childless, the other brothers have an obligation to marry the childless widow. But as we see in other places, both in Chumash and the rest of Tanakh, throughout the Bible, the obligation, in a sense, falls to other members of the family to take this woman in as a wife, and that is why Boaz ultimately ends up with Ruth. But Naomi's trying to set up the situation that Boaz does in fact take her as a wife. So she tells Ruth, Naomi tells Ruth, go down to the threshing floor where Boaz is, and tells her, go get dressed up, go down there, get washed up, get dressed up, and he's going to be sitting and eating, and when he lies down, you're going to go, reglit meraglav, you're going to uncover his feet. Academics say this means uncover his penis. I had a lot of problems with this one also. I wanted to see if this had any connection traditionally, or even if this made sense. Again, persistent theme when we try to understand Tanakh and just try to understand life. If we see something strange, we still try to understand, is there a logical explanation? Is this really as strange as it looks? There's a commentary called the Malbim. And the Malbim was a 19th century commentator. He was a traditionalist who was trying to drum up interest in Tanakh. This may be surprising to some people, but Jews traditionally do not spend a lot of time learning the Hebrew Bible. Primarily, you can actually see some of the volumes behind me. Those are Talmud. Orthodox Jews tend to spend a lot more time studying the Talmud than we do studying Tanakh. But the Malbim saw that this was somewhat an issue, so he decides to write his commentary, and very, very deep commentary, but also explains a lot of issues. And what he explains here, why was she told to uncover the feet? Well, because as we were talking about, this mitzvah of Yivum involves, if the brother refuses to marry the widow, he has to, or rather, the widow has to take off his sandal and spit in his direction. It's called halitza. Halitza is removing the shoe. So the act of uncovering the feet, if we understand it as feet, is supposed to give him a little nudge to do the right thing, as it were. He doesn't have to perform the ceremony of chalitza if he doesn't want to, because it's not biblically required, but nonetheless, that's the illusion. This kind of makes sense. As we're going to see, the term miraglav is actually used several times throughout Perek Gimel, throughout chapter 3, and if he's going to say that it means to uncover Boaz's genitals, it doesn't really make sense, because she, every single time that she's laying there, he finds her laying there. Miraglav. It looks, when you see every single usage, you see it in verse 4, you see it in verse 8, you also see it where I quote it in my dictionary, you see it in verse 14. It looks directional. Miraglav, as I said, doesn't have to be literally the foot. It can, like we talk about in English, the foot of the bed. At the foot of the bed. Does that mean at literally the bed's feet? Or does it mean directionally, should we say under? We know what at the foot of the bed means. It seems to make much more sense to say that when she uncovered something at the bottom end of a person lying down. That seems to just fit better, and it's more consistent. If you go and you read each instance, that's what it means, rather than say that she was uncovering his genitals. Also, this would be kind of an instance of rape almost. Certainly immodest behavior, potentially, as some of the commentaries imply, the reason that she was told to uncover his legs was to perform fellatio on him. Given the fact that in chapter 3, verse 3, and chapter 3, verse 5, when she goes down and then changes her clothes. Rashi explains there, because she wants to be modest, that changing and getting dressed up and going out in the street in very fancy clothes might make people think that she's a prostitute. So if we put these two things together, are we talking about a modest woman? A woman who is the progenitor of the Davidic dynasty? Or are we talking about an immodest woman? If we have the two choices, it would kind of make sense that somebody who's setting up the situation, tradition ascribes the book of Ruth as being authored by Shmuel Navi, then it makes much more sense to say that she's modest. Given everything else, I think I laid out pretty solidly at the beginning of our conversation that it's supposed to be modest. And then to have somebody so important be immodest in the way that it's being asserted, it just doesn't make sense. Just to close, I can't tell you 100% that Professor is wrong, but I don't see it. I don't think it's supported in the literal understanding of the verses. I don't think it's supported by any traditional commentaries. And it just leads you to just such strange places, assuming that people act really strangely. Even stranger than some of the things. Now, clearly, the behavior of people in Tanakh is different from the way that you and I act in today's day and age. That's fine, but really odd behavior. And if we have the option of taking a normal reading and understanding these people's behavior as normal, understanding, of course, these are real people who did real things, to assume that they did things that were so odd and so strange, I really feel that academics are putting in a forced reading to read in that regel means penis. I really think that they're either trying to be just titillating, possibly gross, or it's just what we would say motzilaz, to make fun of Tanakh. I don't see it as being literal. I don't see it as being anything supported by the documentary evidence. Look forward to any responses. I'll put this up, and we'll see what kind of comments come through. I can only imagine. This is going to be a lot of fun. So at any rate, I appreciate your time, and take care. Kol tov, and good night.